Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. Back and, well, we'll just say back. I don't know if I'm better than ever. Apologies for taking last week off. Got a little busy. Didn't have time to do the shows. So we're back at it this week for at least this show, and we'll see what goes on after that. But let's get right to it. The NFL, it was not a good week for several Midwestern teams. Some had good performances, others were absolutely abysmal. I'm just going to let you know right off the bat, I'm going to try to do the timestamp thing again if you want to hear each individual game. I'm probably going to go off on the St. Louis Rams a little bit here, so just as a forward, know that ahead of time. But let's get right into it. The Green Bay Packers dropped another one. That's 3 in a row now as they fell 18-16 to the Detroit Lions, a team that they had beaten many, many years in a row. It had been a long time, in fact, since Green Bay had dropped a game to Detroit, but Matthew Stafford did what Matthew Stafford does. He throws for a decent amount of yardage. He threw for 2 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception. Aaron Rodgers pretty much did what he needed to do. He threw for 333 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the offense just couldn't get rolling outside of that. They had the 2 touchdowns. Obviously, they got a safety on top of that. But other than that, the offense just wasn't quite clicking, which has been kind of the case. Aaron Rodgers is doing everything that he can, and the defense didn't play a bad game. You only allow 18 points. But ultimately, it's just kind of things here or there that are really keeping the Packers from solidifying themselves as a great team as opposed to a decent team. Both teams scored field goals in the first half. It was a lackluster first half, 3-3 at halftime. Green Bay in the first quarter, second quarter for Detroit. And then it was pretty much all Detroit after that until Green Bay got it going in the fourth quarter. But it was too late. Too little too late by that point, because 6 points for Detroit in the third quarter, 9 in the fourth quarter, 13 points all in the fourth quarter for Green Bay as the Packers fall to 6-3, and Detroit is now 2-7. The Cowboys drop another one as they fall now to 2-7 themselves. They only mustered a field goal in the first quarter, and then in the second quarter, nothing at all in the second half. Tampa Bay, obviously, no slouch themselves when it comes to being bad, but they did just enough. They got a field goal in the second quarter and a touchdown in the fourth to win 10-6. Matt Castle, only 186 yards. He is not the solution there. I understand why they made the change from Brandon Weeden. You're trying to get a few more passing yardages downfield, but Matt Castle is no better than Brandon Weeden. I don't necessarily know that he brings anything else to the table. I mean, maybe Matt Castle gives you a little bit more chance to throw it downfield, but really, what is the difference? I mean, if you're going to lose the games anyway, then Brandon Weeden is at least more potential if somebody would try to give him the benefit of the doubt and try to build something with him. But they don't want to take the time. They don't want to go through the effort. And Matt Castle is what Matt Castle is. He has had some success with the Patriots. He had a little bit of success with the Chiefs. But he's not anybody that's going to give you any kind of consistent performance. And he's showing that right now. Moving along right here, let's see, the Titans drop another one to the Panthers as the Panthers remain undefeated. And that was pretty much expected there, as the Titans are pretty terrible and they're going through a coaching change right now. Marcus Mariota, 195 with a pick. Dexter McCluster, only 25 yards, 1 touchdown and a fumble. Tennessee now falls to 2-7. As I mentioned, Carolina is 9-0. It was a decent back-and-forth battle in the first half. It looked like it was going to be an even contest. Carolina had 14 14 points, only 10 for Tennessee. But then Tennessee gets shut out in the second half, and when you do that, you better have built a heck of a lead in the first half if you're going to try to win that game. Obviously, being behind, it didn't matter if Carolina scored another point, as that one was not going to turn out in their favor. The Saints drop another one as they continued their enigma status. They can put up 40 points in a game, one game, and then look absolutely abysmal on offense the next game, as they looked terrible against the Washington Redskins. New Orleans is now 4-6. They only managed a touchdown in the first and second quarters. Got shut out. That seems to be kind of a theme going on right here with a lot of these Midwestern teams getting shut out in the second half. Washington scored 14 in the first, 13 in the second, 10 in the third and fourth, ultimately winning 47-14. Drew Brees, only 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 picks. You can't have that if you're going to ultimately try to win that game. Now, being behind by the amounts that they were, that's going to allow more opportunities for interceptions as well. But they need to get a little bit more consistency from the running game. Mark Ingram has done a pretty good job now that he's been kind of handed the reins in that number one role of recently. But he's still not a consistent back that's going to get you 100 yards per game. He came close, 77. No touchdowns, though. Brandon Cooks was 98 yards, and he caught both of the touchdowns for New Orleans. But they've got to find some way of getting consistency. I mean, they're in a terrible division outside of Carolina, but they're still in a position to where the NFC is pretty much wide open. You have a couple good teams right at the top, but other than that, everybody's dropping games here and there. With the exception right now of Arizona and Carolina. So the wild card spots are really wide open right now, but nobody's taking the reins at all. The Steelers crushed the Browns 30-9. The Browns are just terrible. Johnny Manziel actually had a pretty decent day, 372 yards, a touchdown, and a pick, but he's also their leading rusher with only 17 yards, and he picked up a fumble there. So Cleveland falls to 2-8. They only managed 3 points in the first half, 6 points in the second half, all of which came in the fourth quarter. Pittsburgh kind of spread theirs around. Ben Roethlisberger, who was not expected to play, actually came in as the backup to Landry Jones, who had picked up an ankle injury, but Roethlisberger threw for almost 400 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick, as Pittsburgh improves to 6-4. Continuing on here, the Vikings beat the Raiders 30-14. Is Teddy Bridgewater's doing just enough. He's not a great quarterback, but as we see with the St. Louis Rams, if you have a poor quarterback who's making mistakes and ultimately costing the team, then it doesn't matter how good your defense is. Well, the flip side is true with Minnesota right now. They've got a good defense, and their quarterback is not costing them. He only threw for 140 yards and a touchdown. Adrian Peterson tore it up with 203 yards. But the Vikings are kind of a good example of what the Rams could be if they would allow just enough to happen. They've got Todd Gurley. He's comparable to Adrian Peterson. Nick Foles is right now less than Teddy Bridgewater, and quite frankly, that's saying quite a bit. But Minnesota improves to 7-2. That is quite honestly a record that the St. Louis Rams could have if they had done enough to win those games that were close or within their grasp to win. And instead, obviously, the Rams are what they are. Oakland falls to 4-5. Texans and Bengals is tonight, so let's focus right now on the main game, which was Chicago against St. Louis. Chicago ultimately winning 37-13. Jay Cutler had 258 yards, 3 touchdowns. Nick Foles picked up 200 yards and a pick. How he got to 200, I honestly don't know, because this game was just horrid to watch from a St. Louis perspective. Obviously, the Bears fans got a kick out of it. Langford had 73 yards and a touchdown. Todd Gurley was held to 45 yards rushing. I believe he had close to that in the passing game. Yes, 44 yards in the passing game, as he was the Rams' leading receiver. Now, I'm sorry, 200 yards is nothing to sneeze at, but if your leading receiver only has 44 of that, that means that nobody had a good day there. Todd Gurley picked up a touchdown, the lone touchdown for St. Louis on the day, as they kept things even, 10-10 in the first quarter. But after that, it was just absolutely nothing. A field goal in the third quarter, shutout in the even quarters, the second and fourth. Listen. Kudos to the Bears for picking up the win. They're now 4-5, keeping their hopes alive in the NFC North, because Green Bay, as they're falling back to the pack, is obviously now even behind Minnesota. But that division is kind of jockeying around. And if the Bears can string together some wins, maybe they keep themselves alive in that picture. But the Bears came in at 3-5. Now, were they a 3-5 team in terms of talent, in terms of what they could possibly do on the field? Not necessarily, but you are what your record says you are a lot of the time. And the Bears were 3-5. 37 points allowed is not something you should see from a team that is 3-5. This is the St. Louis Rams' fault. The defense had a bad day. And ultimately, you're going to have that, though, because a lot of this still falls on the offense. If you can only score 13 points, how many wins can you honestly expect a team to get? And this is something that I didn't know, and I heard it on the radio, the Bernie Miklasz show here in St. Louis. I don't necessarily agree with him a lot, don't necessarily even care for his personality some of the time. But I still listen to his show because he presents a lot of interesting facts when I have the opportunity anyway. And he brought up the point today that within the last decade for sure, and I'm not, if I misunderstood him, maybe he meant in Jeff Fisher's career, but it definitely for the last decade, Jeff Fisher has only had an offense that ranked in the top half of the league once. So this is just what we need to come to expect from Jeff Fisher. He has absolutely no interest in the offensive side of the game, has absolutely no interest in allowing there to be an offensive side of the game. And I am not one of those people who is calling for Jeff Fisher's job. I am simply pointing out that he has not done the job of a good head coach right now, whether it was his last few years in Tennessee or whether it's been his tenure here in St. Louis. Now, I sit there and say that I don't call for his job because I don't know what else is out there. I don't have a solution. And that is the way that I try to look at things, whether they be political, whether they be sports-wise. You don't just say, well, this needs to happen. Okay, go out and do it. If you can't present the solution, then you're really only pointing out the problem, which is quite frankly usually evident to most people. So right now, Jeff Fisher is part of the problem because he has absolutely no interest in the offensive side of the ball. And Bernie Miklasz brought up another great point. When it came to finding a defensive coordinator, when the Rams were floundering defensively, despite the fact that they had all the right pieces there to make good defensive decisions, he went out and brought Greg Williams back in, even after all the Bounty Gate scandal, because Greg Williams was one of, if not the best defensive coordinator going around today, at least when the opportunity presented itself to make that hire. When it came time to replace the offensive coordinator in Brian Schottenheimer, who quite frankly wasn't that great to begin with, did he do the same thing? No. He went down the hall, as Bernie put it, and knocked on the quarterback's coach door and said, hey, you want to just run the offense? We might as well keep things going here. No, he didn't have some extensive search. He didn't bring in a whole bunch of high-profile names. I have nothing wrong with Coach Cignetti as a person. I don't know him that well. I don't know what his background is other than the fact that he was the St. Louis Rams quarterbacks coach. So maybe he could be the next good offensive coordinator. But it doesn't even matter from his perspective because he's not going to get that opportunity. Jeff Fisher wants to run the ball. He wants it to basically be Big Ten football from the 60s and 70s and 80s, where it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and if we don't pick up third down, punt it away because our defense will pick up things. Well, that is not how the NFL is played anymore. Whether you want it to be that way, whether I want it to be that way, it doesn't matter because that is not how the NFL is played anymore. Minnesota, I brought it up before, Minnesota is a great example because over the years, they have kind of wasted the talents of Adrian Peterson because they allowed Adrian Peterson to kind of dictate things and say he wants to be the sole focus of the offense. Well, when your running back is the only person that teams need to key on, it sometimes doesn't even matter if the running back goes off for 200 yards, as Minnesota did yesterday. Now, they picked up enough offensive yardage besides that. They got enough good plays besides that to pick up the wins because now they have a quarterback that, for all his faults, manages to take care of the ball enough and make enough plays to where they can win the games. Teddy Bridgewater is not going to the Hall of Fame. He is not ever going to be considered a top-tier quarterback. But Minnesota is able to get to a record of 7-2 because they have a good defense, they have a great running back, they get decent blocking from their offensive line, and their quarterback is good enough to make the plays when he needs to. The Rams don't need Nick Foles to be the next Terry Bradshaw, to be the next Peyton Manning, to be the next John Elway. They need him to take care of the ball and make plays when he needs to, and he cannot do that at all right now. Whether or not that is in him, he has proven that he is capable of doing it when he was in Philadelphia's offense, whether that was just a system issue or whether that was Nick Foles, the true Nick Foles, whether it was an aberration. It does not matter because the bulk of it is right now Nick Foles cannot do that. He cannot produce on third down. The receivers cannot produce on third down. The offensive line cannot protect the quarterback. We are picking up silly penalties at inopportune times. This offense right now is just horrid. It is embarrassing to watch, and there is just not enough going on right now to be able to change it. And again, that falls on Jeff Fisher's head. Whether you love him, I love him as a person. I think he's got an interesting personality. He's got kind of a dry wit. I like him as a coach. But right now, he is not the way that you need to be a head coach in the NFL anymore. Because he is too much old school. He's like Rex Ryan. He's like a lot of people who have engaging personalities but simply aren't great head coaches because they only know one side of the ball, but they are too stubborn to allow somebody else to run things properly on the opposite side of the ball. And it happens a lot, I think, with these defensive coaches. Lovie Smith was a good head coach for the Chicago Bears, but he wouldn't allow the offense to do enough. The offense would not run for Rex Ryan. The offense does not run for Jeff Fisher. It seems like you see a lot of this more with defensive coaches than offensive coaches, where they just are determined to have their side of the ball win the game, and you just can't play that way anymore. You have to figure something out. You have to make plays on third down. This BS, quite frankly, of going 1 for 19 or 2 for whatever or 4 for something during a game for third downs just cannot happen. You have to, first of all, you have to not be in third and long as much as the St. Louis Rams are. Secondly, you have to be able to convert third downs in general. Right now, St. Louis does not have plays drawn up to gain first downs on third down. They're consistently throwing short of the sticks, which goes back to another problem that Jeff Fisher has. He has drafted short, speedy receivers and then tries to play an offense where you need to be throwing to big, strong receivers who are going to break tackles and get those first down yardages because you're looking for yards after the catch. Well, if you're going to have short guys, you need to make sure that they're beyond the first down line to catch the ball because they're going down as soon as they're touched. And if you're not able to do that, you need to draw up plays that are going to create space where they're going to be able to make a run to get past the defender. This old school button hook type of play where they're just standing there expecting to catch the ball and then do something with it doesn't work the way the St. Louis Rams offense is built right now. They don't have a quarterback who can fit it in the windows. They don't have the receivers that can break through and make extra yardage, and that all falls on the head coach. Again, I'm not saying you need to fire Jeff Fisher because I don't know what else is out there unless you want to necessarily promote Greg Williams to where you might have the same kind of problems. I don't know that that is necessarily a pragmatic solution, but we're to the point where changes need to be made, and they need to be made quickly. And ultimately, this all kind of ties back into the stadium issue because right now, I think Jeff Fisher is only in his job because the owner is wanting to push things forward and carry Jeff Fisher over towards LA because he's already done a relocation situation, so he knows how to deal with that. Because quite frankly, looking at what has been presented, Fisher has not gotten the job done. He can be the nicest person, but ultimately you do have to produce results, and he is not getting them right now. He has not had a quarterback that is going to get him those results, but you can't all put it on the quarterback position either, because a lot of this has to fall on Jeff Fisher's head, and ultimately, so far, it has not. Will things change? Probably not. What we see in Nick Foles the last couple games, I think, is what Nick Foles is going to be with the St. Louis Rams, and that's disappointing because we've already wasted Steven Jackson here because they did not get enough talent around him. Now it's looking like, even as a rookie, they could be wasting the talent that is Todd Gurley, because the offensive line, as soon as injuries happen, there's absolutely nothing to back them up. The quarterback is a mess right now. The receivers can't catch a ball, and if they do, they're going to the ground right away because they're not big enough to make any kind of yards after the catch, and they're not drawing up plays to take advantage of the speed. So it's just a mess for St. Louis. Congratulations to Chicago. They deserved the win. They played good enough to win, but they are not good enough to hang 37 points on a team that a lot of people here in the area thought could have been a playoff contender. Now all of a sudden it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's looking exceptionally impossible. Excuse my language there. But sorry for the rant again. That is the view from the Midwest. What did you think about the games that happened yesterday? What do you think is going to happen for the St. Louis Rams or the Chicago Bears or the Kansas City Chiefs? Any of the big-time teams in the Midwest going forward? As I mentioned, that's a game I didn't cover, actually. The Chiefs actually embarrassed Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos. That was a crazy, crazy game. Peyton Manning passes Brett Favre for the all-time passing list, but actually has his worst game that he's ever had in his career. Now, a lot of credit goes to Kansas City because they figured out a defensive formula that had kind of worked in the first game, but Peyton Manning and the defensive team for the Denver Broncos did just enough to pull out the win last second. Well, they couldn't do it at home, but a lot of credit, as I mentioned, goes to Kansas City. They did it. They came up with a game plan to stop Peyton Manning, put it into play, into perfection. One thing about Peyton, though, I'm sick of people talking about his arm strength. People said that John Elway threw too hard to ever win a Super Bowl. He proved them wrong. Peyton Manning is still one of the top-tier quarterbacks in this league. He's just going through a bad period right now. Stop over-analyzing the arm strength. That is the view from the Midwest. What are your views on today's topics? Comment, rate, and subscribe. But until the next time, I'll see you then.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.